Hey everybody, Coldar here. Today we are looking at the Sha of Fear on normal difficulty in Terrace of Endless Spring. So this fight is really just a transition between one of two phases back and forth for everybody in the raid. Because of that, it's quite simple in execution, but it's very, very long. This fight will take a lot of time. So you just have to get into the pattern of things, get used to handling the few mechanics that you'll deal with, and then just get your DPS up to par, and you should be able to get it down. So I think for the video, I'll just split it up and go over each phase separately, and then we'll walk through the fight from there. So as you begin the encounter, you'll face off against the Sha of Fear. And on his platform here, he will also spawn a few ads throughout the fight. And now the first thing you'll notice is that there is a beam of light that's located at the center of the platform here. And any player that stands in it will be tanking the Sha and also be the central point for a cone of protective light behind them. So you can see right now our paladin tank is standing in that beam, and outward from his sides is this cone that's being formed. And he stepped back when our monk tank took over tanking there. So this is kind of a cool mechanic, although I have to say I think it was a little underutilized. I think it would have been cool if you could actually move around and change the position of that beam, and then have that be part of the mechanic when you deal with the ads. But at any rate, players that stand inside this protective barrier take 10% reduced damage from all sources, and they're protected from the most dangerous ability during this phase, which is Breath of Fear. So Breath of Fear is cast around every 45 seconds or so, and if it hits you and you're outside the protective light beam area, it will deal just shy of 500,000 damage in a little over a second, and basically kill you, probably. It also has a fear effect for 5 seconds, but that's kind of minor if you're dead, obviously. So the first thing everyone needs to get used to is to always step into the beam a few seconds before Breath of Fear is about to occur and protect themselves from that. And if they do that, then once the fear goes off, they can step out of the beam protection again to deal with ads. So the other effects on this platform are really just ways for the Sha and the ads to deal damage to you. So probably the first one that you'll notice is Thrash. And this is cast every fourth attack that the Sha deals. So if he's slowed, it's going to be around every 10 seconds or so. And every fourth attack, he will thrash, dealing 2 additional hits when he attacks. So every fourth attack is 3 melee hits simultaneously. And this can be pretty hefty damage. Your tanks are absolutely going to want to keep track of this timing and use minor mitigation cooldowns when this occurs. It will do probably around 400,000 damage if all 3 hits connect on most average tanks. So the worst case scenario is they just need to be topped off completely when that's happening. So your healers likewise need to keep track of that. And your tanks and healers should have obviously communicate if there's a thrash coming and the tank won't have a cooldown or whatever it might be. You need to keep them topped off. Other than that, the damage on the tank is not very severe. So the 3 melee swings between thrashes are not that damaging. And, the tank can pretty easily be healed and just topped up between thrash effects. Now, the most dangerous thing for the rest of the group is probably the scariest part of this platform phase. And that is the ads that spawn. These terror spawns will appear in pairs, one on the right and one on the left, outside of the protective beam of light. So you can see there's one on the right there. When they spawn, they'll create a barrier in front of them that protects them from all attacks from the front cone, in front 180 degrees of them. So to do damage to them, you need to get out of the protection of the light beam and get behind them, as I was doing there, and then you can attack them. Now, any tear spawn that's up will just chain cast Penetrating Bolt. You can see it's a 1-second cast, can't be interrupted, and this casts on a random player up top here, and it's a projectile, so you can dodge it. You can see where it's going to land. But if it hits you, it does pretty heavy shadow damage, so around 95,000 or so, a little under shadow damage. But it also gives you a stacking debuff that increases shadow damage taken by 25%, 10% actually, per stack. And this can stack up to 5 total. This lasts for 15 seconds, so the goal here is ideally to just watch where the projectiles are landing. You can see them indicated by the blue puffs of smoke on the ground, and just step away from them so you're not getting hit. However, if you take a couple hits, it's not the end of the world, because most of the other damage is pretty minor, but you'll need to be extra vigilant in dodging from thereafter, because if you get 4 or 5 stacks, future hits as well as any other shadow damage is going to be really dangerous. And that's probably the way most people will die when you're initially getting used to it. So just watch for those effects on the ground and try to get out of them. Other than that, there's an Eerie Skull attack that the Sha will use, and this is just cast on a random raid member. And you can't really avoid this one, but it just does about 85,000 shadow damage on impact to that player and anyone within 2.5 yards, so very short. So the goal here is just make sure no one's really stacked up on top of each other throughout this platform phase. If you can spread out a little bit, you can easily dodge your own projectiles and other people don't have to move, and the Eerie Skull damage won't be shared to multiple people. So pretty simple there. And that's pretty much it. The only other thing you need to be aware of is that the Sha doesn't move, and you can't force him to change his position in any way. So if a tank is not in melee range of him at all times, his current target that is, he will start to use a reaching attack and chain cast it. And this will pretty much kill people very quickly. It's just a huge amount of damage and increase in shadow damage stacks. So you need to always be sure to have a tank in melee range, basically standing in that beam. The way that this would not be possible, however, is due to the mechanics of the second phase. And this is triggered every 90 seconds when the Sha uses Ominous Cackle. So let's get into that phase now. So the second phase that everyone will have to deal with throughout the fight is the Archer platform. And as I mentioned, this is triggered when Sha of Fear uses Ominous Cackle. Ominous Cackle selects 5 random raid members, the first cast, but it always includes 1 tank, 1 healer, and then 3 DPS. Those 5 people will be transported to one of 3 random platforms where a crossbowman is waiting for them, and the people in this group will have to deal with this crossbowman quickly, because in another 90 seconds, regardless of whether this group has finished this task or not, Ominous Cackle will be cast again. And the second cast is going to go on the other 5 people that are already on the platform. So if the first group is not done with the crossbowman and back on the platform in time, within 90 seconds, the next group is going to be transported, and that means no one will be in range tanking the Sha of Fear, and he'll use his reaching attack and wipe you really quickly. So the goal here is to manage the mechanics on the crossbowman well enough while sustaining high DPS that you can get him down quickly and get back to the main platform in time. So to do that, once you get on here, the crossbowman will be stationary in the center, but he can turn and face whatever direction he wants. He will need to be tanked, so make sure your tank taunts him, picks him up right away. His basic attack is is a sort of melee attack, but it's just a shoot in this case rather than melee swing. And that will just hit the tank. Now, fairly frequently, he will use Dread Spray, and this is cast in a pattern based on the particular crossbowman. So there's 3 different patterns, but essentially he fires 16 shots in a pattern, and they do damage to whoever they hit in one of the quadrants around the room. But if you get hit twice by Dread Spray, you'll be feared for a couple seconds. So generally speaking, you want your group to be spread out around the room for mitigation of Dread Spray damage. The other reason you want to be spread out, in addition to lowering the damage everyone takes, is because of the orbs that are spawning. So very, very frequently, the Sha globe orbs will spawn around this platform. You can see them there. I'm picking one up. And their location is pretty random. They last about 8 seconds, and after 8 seconds, if they're not picked up, which means just run over them with a player, if they're not picked up, they will be resorbed by the crossbowman and heal the crossbowman for 5% of their total health. So this is really, really bad because the DPS requirement is not a laughing matter in getting this guy down in that 90-second window when you're doing all this other stuff. So the fewer orbs that the crossbowman consumes and therefore heals, the better. Ideally, you don't want them to consume any orbs, so you have to be very aware of your surroundings and pick up orbs within that 8-second window of them spawning. The benefit for doing so is quite varied depending on your class and spec. The biggest benefit is going to be to healers, because picking up a globe will regenerate a percentage of your main resource, your primary resource. And what we found after testing was what this actually means is mana if you have a mana bar, and energy if you have an energy bar, and presumably rage if you have a rage bar, but we didn't see that for sure. But unfortunately, it means like, say, hybrid DPS, Shadow Priests, Moonkin, stuff like that, they're going to get mana rather than something that they really want. Rep Paladins will get mana instead of holy power. So it's kind of not very beneficial for a lot of classes. Generally speaking, your healers should get most of them, because this will allow them to have completely full mana throughout this phase and by the time they end the phase and go back to the main platform. So because of that, as a healer, you can pretty much spam your heal spells throughout this entire fight. And since you're always going to be on this platform every 90 seconds, or excuse me, every 3 minutes, since you alternate, you will never run out of mana, really. So just keep that in mind as a healer. You should spend your mana inefficiently, if necessary, to keep people alive, since you're going to have plenty of chances to get orbs on this platform. So what we basically do here is kind of spread around so that everybody that's a ranged player or healer has a quadrant of the room that they kind of cover, and they pick up the orbs near them. And melee can do the same, but obviously they have a little bit further to run and they'll get out of range of the boss. But even your tank can get them. The crossbowman will still shoot at the tank as long as they have threat, even if the tank runs away. So tanks are great for this, especially monk tanks that get energy. They can actually benefit from that quite a bit. So the goal here is just to burn this crossbowman down as quickly as you can, picking up all the orbs so that none of them actually get back into range. Now at 20% health, the crossbowman will use Death Blossom, which he just used there. And this is the most dangerous ability throughout this phase. So it's basically a 5-second channel, and over that 5-second period, it will deal about 87,000 damage every half second to everyone in the raid. This is physical damage. So before physical mitigation, you're talking 850,000 or so physical damage to everyone in the group. Sorry, not in the raid, just these 5 people. So it's a huge amount. Now, unlike other physical attacks that have been added recently in raid encounters, this is mitigated by armor. So plate wearers, mail wearers will take less damage than clothies, leather wearers. That said, you can line of sight this effect if you cannot deal with the damage by standing on the other side of one of the pillars around the outside of the room. However, I suggest practicing not doing that because you want to spend the most time you can DPSing. And if you go line of sight, you're probably going to miss some orbs as well. And when that means you're just going to spend even more time DPSing that extra health that they gain and all that stuff. So what we found is that since any given player will only be on this platform every 3 minutes because of the timing of Ominous Cackle and the alternation of target selection, you should always have your big damage reduction cooldowns available. So every 3 minutes, if you have a cooldown you can use for it, that's what you want to do. So for example, for a healer, I'll use my personal cooldown just to mitigate some damage on myself, but then I'll use my AE heal revival every time the Death Blossom occurs. And so this way we can actually stay out during the Death Blossom and keep DPSing to get the boss down quickly. So, yeah, it can be a little bit challenging to get used to it, but generally outside of Death Blossom, just keeping people topped off between the Dread Spray attack should not be too difficult for your healer. And then you're just collecting orbs, keeping your mana high, and then spamming all your mitigation cooldowns and heal cooldowns for that Death Blossom attack to finish them off. And then once you complete this phase and the crossbowman dies, there'll be a little orb in the center of the platform that everyone should right-click on quickly, and this will transport them back to the main platform. So I'll go ahead and talk about what you gain by doing this and how it benefits you in the main phase or main platform phase. So once you complete a crossbowman platform and you right-click on the orb in the center there, you're transported back to the Sha of Fear platform and you receive a 30-second buff called Fearless, which is awesome. It basically gives you 60% damage and healing output. You get 120% movement speed, and you're immune to fear effects, namely Breath of Fear. So, while Fearless is active for that 30 seconds, you can remain outside of the protective beam of light area when Breath of Fear occurs and not have to worry about it. It won't do any damage to you or anything. So this means this is a great opportunity to clean up the extra terror spawns that are likely to be active around the platform, because otherwise they're just going to overwhelm the group. So that said, we found that we couldn't dedicate all of our DPS to this task. Otherwise, no damage would ever really be dealt to the Sha himself. So, generally speaking, we have one player from each group of 5 that is assigned to the crossbowman groups. One player from each of those groups will stick on the Sha of Fear full time after they return from a crossbow platform. So, generally you want high single target DPS players to do this. So we would often use melee DPS like our enhancement shaman. And basically when he comes back from the crossbow platform, he just immediately runs up and attacks the Sha and stays on him full time until he's transported back down to the crossbow platform once again. This leaves 2 DPS, the other 2 DPS in that 5-man group, to deal with the adds. And they may not be able to deal with them quite as fast as they spawn, but the goal is to keep their numbers low enough until the next crossbowman group returns from their platform and has the Fearless buff, giving them a huge damage boost and allowing them to sort of clean up what's left over. So, again, the goal here is just to find a balance. You may need to adjust the rules slightly based on your raid's DPS. If it's higher or lower, you can have more or less damage on the Sha full time. But you can't just completely ignore the Sha or he'll never die. And this is already a very long fight. So just be ready to get into these patterns and kind of repeat them over and over. No, all that said, that really covers everything in the fight. It's not that difficult, to be quite honest. And once you just get used to what you have to do on each platform, and then handle those transition periods properly, balance your DPS on the ads and the Sha, then things will fall into place. So normally I would do a walkthrough of the fight itself, but I think you can kind of piece together the transitions from the phase explanations, because otherwise this would just be another 12 minutes or whatever of watching the same stuff. So I'm not going to do that this time. So yeah, I think that covers it. That's the Sha of Fear. Good luck, and thanks for watching.